Welcome to the Knock Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Debunking the Missionaries Tonight, the final show, 11 of 11 of One for Israel's debunking their claims and issues. Rabbi, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
Very welcome to come back.
Can't have you in the studio. I'll just soon have you on Skype. Welcome back, for sure.
So we're going to finish this week, make it 11.
Okay.
I won't get into the Kabbalistic issues of having 11 applying to missionaries, so we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
But those who know such things know why it's 11. So anyways, yeah, we'll continue. What we're going to do, we have a few little things left over, which are really of little importance, except for the last one, which is going to be a little fun. And then we're going to do basically a summary, go back over everything we saw, and basically, bring it all together into one. I know when you make a lot of shows like this, one after another one, a lot of issues you're bringing up, that sometimes you can lose the message.
Right.
You lose the forest for the trees. Okay. So what we want to do is let's finish with the trees, and then we're going to bring it together and show how the forest comes out.
Sounds like a plan. All right, it's all you.
I'm glad you enjoy that, because whether you did or not, that's the way I'm going to do it. So, I don't take personally, but that's the way it's going to be. You don't like it, you don't have to listen to the rest of it. That's all. Okay, so let's continue. We've been going through different things about their attack on ultra-Orthodox. We've seen it's texts that are common to all of Orthodoxy. Anybody who could call themselves Orthodox would follow them, vis-a-vis women. And we've been debunking them one at a time, at different times errors. So now we want to go to the last thing, is dealing with shaming or inferiority of women, things of that type of nature that they're trying to argue. Now, the first one he brings, and this is a Gemara, which also is in Shulchan Aruch, where it says that a person is supposed to save the life of, he says, a drowning woman or something, and a man, you save the man before a woman. This is actually a misreading of what's there. It's actually not what happens. The Gemara there in Horios 13a, which I have in front of me, says this is a Mishnah. It says that a man is before a woman when it regard to sustenance, meaning if somebody needs to have be fed, you feed the man first, and to return something they lost. For a woman is before a man when it has to do with things like wearing clothing, or to redeem the person when they were captured. Now, the reason why it's that, obviously, is what it's talking about is, listen, what is a bigger shame on the person involved? So whatever's more shameful, we try and take it at first. So for example, a woman's being captured, and that time means she would be raped or something like that. So in order to save that kind of thing from happening, she would come first before men, because raping men was not very common then. Not quite sure with today how you would deal with such an issue, but then it wasn't common. Then it continues also the next Mishnah. After the Gemara talks about a whole order of who comes first. And so it says, for example, if he and his father and his rabbi, rabbi means somebody who taught him all his Torah, were captured, who goes first? And they say his rabbi comes first. But however, his mother goes before everybody. So again, we see again that the female is considered favored in as far as something is concerned. The next Mishnah talks about among the Jewish people who versus a Kohen, a priest, or a Levite, or Yisrael, and they have an order as far as things are concerned. But the point of the matter is, we're talking about a situation where you can only save one. So when you're supposed to save, your mother, of course, comes before everything, which I believe for most of us, our mothers were women. I don't know if there's any exceptions out there. So the idea that a woman is going less than a man in that situation is actually a misreading of what it says there. Okay, next thing is it talks about, brings up the Yerushalmi on Shabbos, The citation of it is not very good, but it's talking about the 6th chapter. And the problem is, of course, the 6th chapter doesn't say anything of the sort. The 6th chapter is talking about what a person is allowed to wear outside on Shabbos. It talks about men, talks about women. This particular talks about women. And it's talking about, so he's trying to say that the Shalmi there says that a woman is not allowed to wear jewelry outside. Is not allowed to, a man is not allowed to give jewelry to women at all. Okay. Now we saw before, of course, that that's not true. The Rambam says specifically that a man is supposed to buy for his wife jewelry and stuff like that. That's one of the requirements for a man. Is actually he should buy nice things for his wife like that. Obviously, if he has money. If he doesn't have money, he can't do it. But if he does have money, he's supposed to. And the Gemara there is talking specifically about what you're allowed to go out with. The basic principle is like this. The concern you have is carrying outside. One's not allowed to carry in an open place. It's not in a place where there's not what we call an Erev, which makes the place to be as if it's enclosed. So you are allowed to carry it. So in a place where you're not allowed to carry, it says a woman's not allowed to carry certain things. And the general rule of that is the reason why the things you're not allowed to carry are basically those kinds of things that the woman would take off in the street to show to somebody. So something we take off to show somebody with. So that's what it's talking about there. It has nothing to do with saying women aren't allowed. In fact, the exact opposite is the case. Women are allowed. The ultra-Orthodox women all have. My wife has. My daughter-in-laws all wear jewelry. They all have. Nobody, the husbands, we all buy for our wives jewelry. As an example, for my 40th anniversary, I got something my wife wanted for years, to have a nice set of pearls. Jewelry you buy for your wives. In fact, it's a requirement to do it if you have the money for it. It's an actual requirement. So this is another one of these instances where they lie about what Judaism talks about because basically they want to do it. Next, he brings a source that I'm totally unaware of. Rabbi Rachlevsky wrote a work called Chamoro Shel Mashiach, the donkey of the Mashiach, and he brings there that the Ri, Rabbi Isaac Lurie, used to spit whenever he saw a woman who was dressed immodest. Now, I don't know if the source, anything like that. It's certainly, I have not seen it in those sources that I know from the Riyah Kudish, which are considered very reliable. Shifchiari, there's a cipher, Emek HaMelech, which has an introduction. He was also from the Kos Talmidim from that time. I have no idea where he gets his source from at all. But in any case, even if, let's consider if it was true, all it's trying to say is that the Riyah was showing that he was disgusted when women dressed immodestly. Well, we know, of course, the New Testament also talks about women dressing modestly. It's certainly a thing that's required, and there's nothing wrong with that. So he did a physical action as far as that. What does it have to do in general? Are they trying to argue that, yes, women should go around immodestly? They have no problem with women dressing half naked and walking around, and that's certainly fine. I don't think that's really true. Okay? And that's really what he's talking about here. Women who were immodest, that he would show that he had this statement. It's absolute hypocrisy to even say such a thing like that, because they also would do the same thing. Then he brings from Amnam Yitzchak. Amnam Yitzchak is not a rabbinic scholar, nor is anything that he said considered. He is very popular, gives a lot of lectures. He's been responsible for a lot of Sephardim returning to Judaism. He's not. And so he says that women shouldn't drive cars. The reason behind that, which is not discussed about, is that women basically wear skirts. And if a woman goes in and out of cars sometimes, it could be that she becomes uncovered in a way which is considered immodest. That's basically the idea behind that mostly. It's a question of modesty of doing that. It's not just women. It's not uncommon that men don't drive. I don't drive. And a lot of Hasidic men do not drive. It's just, whatever. It's not a big deal. We don't feel that we're being persecuted or anything like that. It's just a thing what it is. And there's a lot of women who do drive that are Hasidic, depending on where you live. It all has to depend where you're living and what's the custom of the place and what it's allowed to do. What Amnam Yitzchak says, again, that's not halukha, that's not Jewish law, that's not anything. Okay, the last one is actually from a Rav who is very well regarded, and for that case, he's actually the exception to the rules here. Just like Avadia Yosef is considered a very well regarded person, and everybody else, almost everybody else I mentioned, and nobody knows, I have no clue who these guys are. That's Eliashiv, who was nifted not long ago. To understand what kind of person this is, I saw actually where he lives in Maya Shura before he died. This was a man of such humility. He lived in abject poverty. He had a very, very small house. I would say its size looked like it was not much bigger than maybe twice the size of my room here, which would make it much, much less than the size of my house. He was a scholar who was known for learning day and night. He was very well respected for his knowledge. Okay. Now, to understand what he's talking about is, as we mentioned before, the Torah is, and the Tanakh is quite clear that we keep separation between men and women because of issues of modesty and the like. For example, again, in Zechariah 12 to 14, it talks about how families were kept apart during a time of mourning. And among the more religious, it's customary that we separate men and women as much as possible. We have different schools. It's very well known. It has nothing to do with that. Each one does things. It's no real problem. So because of the buses in Israel, and in America, we have a bus like this also here in America, where women are not always dressed in the most modest ways, especially now in the summertime. And it's something that Orthodox men don't want to be exposed to. Orthodox communities have made, the ultra-Orthodox communities specifically, have made special buses for themselves. These are called Mahadran buses. These are things that are especially for the ultra-Orthodox community. Okay? Had nothing to do with the community at large. As far as, unlike Christians in America who try and force their morality on other people, the ultra-Orthodox basically want to be left alone, to not do it. If you go to Israel, which I expect most of you to go to, there's a place called Maya Shurim and there are other places. And before you go there, they have a sign saying we're asking you that when you go in here, you should dress modestly, not immodestly, because they don't want to be exposed to something. But in Tel Aviv and other places, people dress the way they want. No trying. If you enter our space, we don't want you to bother us. Okay? So these Mahadran buses were specifically buses that were made so that men and women don't have to sit together, they can sit apart. We have one here between the city of New York and Muncie where they have actually a curtain down the front so the men can sit on one side, the women can sit on other sides. Different buses have different things. When there's not two curtains, women go into the back way, there's a opening to go into the back of the bus, go that way, in the front of the bus. It works out whatever it is. The issue is, however, this is what the ultra-Orthodox communities want for their people. Now, Rabbi Yasher said, what about somebody who goes onto the bus, who's not punting him, and just doesn't want to follow the laws? That has happened in America. It's happened in other places also, where people go into, knowing that the ultra-Orthodox want to be left alone and to do this, specifically to trample on their rights, to be able to live their life as they wanted. They want to have their own buses, they want not like public, and they want to do that. In that case, he says that these people who do that, you definitely, there's no problem with shaming people. You don't want to shame people. We don't go to Tel Aviv and shame people for the way they dress. We don't go to other places. But if you're going to go into our spaces, where we ask you, listen, you understand this is the way we want to be separate. It's a question of just having respect for other people and, other people's rights of being that way. Now, apparently the One for Israel people have found that a little objectionable, which is very interesting because, why should they reject them? They're not going on to it unless they're trying to do what Christians always do, is impose their values on other people. But otherwise, there's nothing. These are private buses for Orthodox people who live have certain values, live in a certain way, and do not want to be disturbed. Now, the last two actually are quotes from our friend Yosef Mizrahi. And before I do it, I want to go into what he says. I want to say again, remind you that I have a letter here. Here's actually pretty if you want to see it. Signed by rabbis from all parts of Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, even things that are not ultra-Orthodox, attacking him for things that he says, for his things that are offensive and things that are not even true, which we will see here again is the same situation. Okay? So this guy is not an authority. So I don't even have to, certainly I don't even have to answer what he says, but I'm going to just say what he says and comment on it, what the situation is. Number one, Yosef Mizrahi says a person shouldn't get, a woman should not get fat. I assume she's talking about a married woman. Okay. Now, there's no halacha about that whatsoever. However, if you are aware of things with marriages, certainly a woman's looks can cause a problem in a marriage. That's factual. It doesn't mean Jewish or non-Jewish. And as far as the question of, makes sense that in many cases, women, if they are unattractive to their husband, that is something that can cause friction in a family, and it happens. It's normal. It's not having to be Jewish or non-Jewish. It just happens to be the way men and women are. Men are very influenced and very from what they see, and so a wife who's more attractive is something that's more important. So as a question of that, it's not saying halachically, if your wife is fat, you're supposed to divorce her. There's nothing like that. There's a lot of, I can guarantee you if you would come to where I live, which is very Orthodox community, there's a lot of women that are fat, and they're very happily married, and their mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers, whatever. There'll be divorces over that. That's not required. But as a thing to Shulman bias, meaning that there should, in the marriage, it's probably a good idea to try and do it. If you don't care about your, it could be an instance you don't care about your husband. No, that's what it's saying. It's not saying that halacha is what. And truth of the matter is, it's very funny that they would even attack such a thing because it makes sense. I mean, she's going to get married eventually. Maybe she won't because Paul says of course not to get married. But if she would certainly be concerned about what her husband thinks about her looks. I mean, I can't imagine that she would marry. She could even remain married if she didn't care what her husband thinks about her looks, just like a man is caring what his wife thinks about him. That's part of being married, to care about what the other person thinks or what the person feels. So I don't think that this is totally absurd. It's not a halachic thing. It's not a religious thing. But a certain thing is common sense as far as the marriage counseling is to tell to tell you you be concerned for what your partner thinks. There's things that men do that bother women. If you do it, then that's wrong. If a woman does something that bothers men, these are wrong. If you're talking about trying to have a marriage that is good and peaceful, these are things that are important to know. The third thing that he says, or they say I've not heard him say, is that a woman who's not a virgin has absolutely zero value. I think there's no more value than a bottle cap of Coca-Cola, something like that, whatever. I don't know what the context is of that. It is certainly undisputable that in the Torah, when it talks about marriage laws, it talks about dowries and stuff like that. And there is a difference between a woman who has never been married and is a virgin, as opposed to a woman who has been married and is either divorced or, in many cases, widowed. So, for example, the primary place we see first of all in a number of places, but let's just look at one place in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, here it talks about marriage. So we see in okay, it's in verse 19. I have to give you a little bit about this. When you married, remember, marriage in old times were basically arranged. And when you made arrangements into families, you married, you would know the woman was either never been married, was a virgin, that would be part of it, or if she was not. So the Torah here is talking about what happens if you find she is or he isn't. You go to, it's something that, whatever. It's not nowadays, but it is in the Bible. And unless you want to throw out the Bible, then you're going to have to deal with it. Okay. So it says like this: what happens if a husband goes and says, my wife wasn't a virgin? And he goes to a court and says it was, and they find out that she actually was. So he gets fined, and it says specifically to fine him. And they shall fine him 100 silver shekels and give it to the father, for he is just found the virgin of Israel. The 100 shekels is what would be paid. That's the normal amount given for a woman who was a virgin. As far as being married, that was usual dowry. I mean, dowries were based on how much you had, whatever, but you would give a dowry. And that's what the wife's side could give the husband's side in order to marry. That's, I don't know how many years it hasn't been around, but it was something that certainly everybody's hundreds of years ago, all families, whether Jewish or non-Jewish, they had dowries. It's not something new. It's not something, oh, it's just not something we do nowadays, but it is, talks about value. However, we see also later on, what happens if she becomes not a virgin? What kind of valuation is put on her? And we see in verse 29 that it says that he has a person who that a person who has relations with a woman who's a virgin obviously becomes not a virgin. That the fine is only 50 shekels because there's a difference in price of half. And we see this, that the point there is, and the mission talks about also a similar type of thing, that the valuations have because of that. That actually it's not true that a person who's not a virgin has no value. Of course they have a value. Every human being has a value. We have valuations. There's a whole discussion in the end of Leviticus about saying, I'm going to pay the cost of this. How much is the person valued? Valuation depends on your age and stuff like that. It's one of these things in the Torah that there's no temple now, so it's not so relevant. But the point of that is that of course it has a value. Every human being has a valuation. We're just talking. There's a discussion of valuation as far as being married, a woman who's a virgin as opposed to a woman who's not a virgin, and that's basically it. I mean, just think about it. Usually, people want to marry somebody who's not been married, if they've not been married. That doesn't always happen. I know lots of cases where that's not the case, but that's what it is. It just is a preference. And as you know, in capitalist societies, those things are more value, cost more money. That's all it is. That's the concept involved. She's considered more valuable. But that's it. It has nothing to do with anything like that. And it certainly has nothing to do with today. And I have no idea what this Rabbi Mazach was talking about because he's somewhat of a nutcase. So that's the end of it. Now, in order to, in the end here, what's interesting is they want a contrast between the way Jesus was and the way Judaism was, with all these things about women. Now, of course, remember, we discussed before things, like 1 Timothy 2, which says, a woman gets salvation through childbearing, and all these other different things that we mentioned along the line. So it's sort of interesting to know, as Ephesians 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Peter 3, we talked about women being subjugated and stuff like that. It's very interesting that they would even have the chutzpah to say, well, let's look at this particular passage because this proves that Jesus, that they were egalitarian as far as that's concerned. But the truth of the matter is that that's not really what the case is. Okay? I mean, everybody, both Jew and Christian, believes that before God, everybody's equal. God is before, God doesn't, like that. But that doesn't mean that in the letters from Paul doesn't talk about different things differently. I mean, Paul says there's no men and women. It doesn't mean that they're not male and women, because of course distinguish between men and women, saying the women should cover their hair, because the women should be subjected to their husbands. There's a lot of things that differentiate men and women. That's talking about men and women before God. Well, we all agree with that. Okay? What we may have to do in this world because of a distinction between men and women, Kohen, Levi, whatever, these things are non-egalitarian. Both Christians and Jews agree with that. We might disagree about exactly which ones, but we agree. So anyways, in order to do it, he brings a very interesting passage. Now, if you were to go into the New Testament, and except for the birth and the crucifixion, if you were to ask somebody, what is the most famous story in the New Testament? I'm pretty certain that this is the one that's going to come up. This is in John chapter 8, verses 2 through 11. And I'll read the story here. It's very interesting. Let's start in verse, while Jesus went to Mount Olives early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to the temple. All the people came to him and sat down and began to teach. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do no sin again." Now, there's a lot of interesting things about this, which I think I'll just take a few minutes to talk about before I really talk about what I want to say about it. First of all, it's very interesting. We see Paul's letters clearly talking against immorality. We see in Revelations where it says that a person who lives immoral and different kinds of morality gets burned in the lake of fire forever. Is it possible that they'd never heard of this story? Now, I did give some classes here on Tanakh Talk dealing with the New Testament text, and this text came up, and I'm going to be just a little about this. I'm not going to go into as much as that, but I just want you to think a second. When Paul talks about immorality, or when Revelation talks about people going to the lake of fire, is it possible that they never read this passage in John? And then think about it again. What is Jesus actually teaching here? Here we have somebody who did violate something. Is he saying that adultery is no problem? That we should turn the other way when people commit adultery? Is he saying, which is what it really seems to be, that I don't care what it says in the Torah. God may have said that, but I'm saying don't worry about what God says. Now, the take that they get from the One for Israel people is that it shows how Jesus was merciful and stuff like that. But let me ask you a question. If you have a psychopathic murderer, is it really mercy to just let him go out and do it again? Even if you tell him, don't do it anymore, but just let him go? We have to think about that as far as things are concerned. What is this? What is even the purpose of this here? It's a very interesting to be in the purpose here. But what's the most important is that it never happened. This is a story that never happened. And in fact, it was never in the New Testament to begin with. It was added later on. Now, how do I know? It's not me. Of those who listen to my class when I discuss it more in depth. No, I'll just do it in short. It's known. James White is a very big Christian scholar. He writes about it. And he brings the source evidence from all of the transcripts that exist, that the overwhelming never had it. And even when it occurs, they find it in different places. So, for example, in some places it appears after Luke 7:52. Others have it in different places. Some have it in John 7:52. Others have it John 21 at that place. Floats around. And there's even one place which has it in Luke, not in John. And the fact is that the overwhelming majority don't have it. So his argument was, and he brings it, that it doesn't exist. Now, I would like to bring another proof of it, because there are those. And that is from a fellow named Daniel Wallace. There's an interesting book that came out where he debated Bart Ehrman about the text, the rightly the text of the New Testament. A very important thing to look at if you're really involved with that. I've go through it a number of times. And the subject came up again about John 8, about the story. So let me just read a little bit of what he says here. This is on page 29. Now, the person, I should tell you who this was. Daniel Wallace is involved in projects as far as the New Testament documents. He finds old New Testament documents, and he's trying to find the earliest ones to find possible to make the text as good as possible. He also happens to be a professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, which is where Eitan Bar, the big guy from One for Israel, is getting his PhD. Okay, so it's somebody he may even have spoken to. Now, he says here, we both agree that the story of the woman caught in adultery, John 7:53 to 8:11, was not part of the original John. And here's what he says, one of the most favorite thing I've ever heard him ever say. It's my favorite passage that's not in the Bible. What do you think about it a second? It's my favorite passage that's not in the Bible. What he's saying is it's just not in the Bible. Now, it continues later on page 58. talking about it. Bart has actually done some of the very best work on the pericope of the woman caught in adultery, which is the word we're talking about here. I am relatively convinced not only that the story is not literally authentic, but also that it is not entirely historical. What that means by saying not entirely historical, we'll leave aside the whole, what this has to do with the biblical text, which I don't believe. Never happened. You're arguing against the rabbis from a text which is not from the New Testament, and Jesus never did it. It's all made up, phony baloney, and that you're using to justify yourself contradicting what it says in the New Testament itself many times and attacking the rabbis. That is definitely got to be the lowest of the low in any kind of situation whatsoever. Using a fake story that never occurred and using that as a quote against rabbis who base many things on, specifically on texts that appear in the Tanakh itself. Okay, that's all the texts that they have. So I'd like to go through a conclusion on this once again. And before I do it, I do want to read something again. The whole purpose is to say that Jewish Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Judaism does not have respect for women, does not have care to women. So I'd just like to repeat again what the Rambam teaches, which every person who gets married learns. And that is, therefore, I'm going to just translate as I go along, therefore the Chachamim, which are rabbis, command that a person should honor his wife more than he honors himself. Honoring meaning that he has to do more for her, buy her more things, make her do things that show that he has honor for her, more for himself. And love her as much as he loves himself. And if he has a lot of money, he should use the money for her good. You have money, you're supposed to take care of your wife first. She comes first. And you should not make her fear you, and you should speak to her pleasantly. You should not be depressed to her. You should speak to your wife as if you're depressed, you're not happy with her, and also not in anger. That's what Judaism teaches. Regardless of the misquotes and everything they say, that's what Judaism teaches about how men are supposed to treat their wives specifically and women. Okay, so let's now review in summary what we've seen so far. First of all, the reason why this is so bad and so dangerous, it's not like in the Tanakh where Isaiah or the prophets would say something about the Jewish people as messengers from Hashem, speaking amongst ourselves like a father speaks to a child. Okay, if I speak to my child, it's one thing. If I speak to somebody else's child, it's totally different. It's not like that. Because they are Christians. Their source is everything, by education, by belief, everything. One for Israel are Christians. They are not Jewish. They have nothing to do with the Jewish religion. It's as if the patriarch would start to criticize the Jewish religion in Israel. Everybody would be up in arms about it, and we couldn't consider anti-Semitism. It's absolutely no difference with One for Israel. They are no different Christians as the patriarch. They may have certain doctrinal differences, but their sources are all the same. They are from Christians. And in a sense, it's, again, if we continue one of the things, what I pointed out, it's extremely hypocritical, the whole approach. They ignore, they attack teachings in the Tanakh, ignoring what it says in the Tanakh, teaches the rabbis, ignoring things that it says in the Tanakh. So, for example, hair covering and the separation of sexes, we see clearly from in the Tanakh that there's a certain type of modesty that applies, that the Tanakh talks about, and they ignore that. And they ignore similar teachings in the New Testament. So, for example, covering their head in 1 Corinthians, for example. And even more, they attack Judaism and they ignore teachings in the New Testament, which are even worse. Ephesians 5, 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Peter 3, which all talk about women, wives being subservient to the husbands. Subservient. Not that they're equals and that they should show certain respect. Wives are subservient to the husbands. Not that husbands should be, care about their wives. But that, and even more, 1 Timothy 2, salvation for a woman is through childbirth, not faith alone. But childbirth also, that's what, how do you do? That's what it says. But they will come out and attack Judaism for what it says, based on that. Now, also another hypocrisy to the show is they start off talking about their appeal to the progressive Israel. They're not progressive. They don't subscribe to all these progressive ideas and all these things that are going on. So how is it, why are they talking about it like that? It's absolutely hypocritical. It would like me appealing to progressivism in trying to say things. That's we don't believe in. Then again, another problem that they talk about is the blaming all of Orthodox Judaism. And this has two problems. And one, the big obscure rabbis nobody knows about who are not Orthodox Jews. Sometimes they claim people who are authorities who are not authorities by Orthodox Jews or any Jews at all, like Yosef Mizrahi, as we mentioned. So what are we talking about? And then they mention different things from sources which every Orthodox Jew would subscribe to things in the Talmud and the Rambam and stuff like that. So what it's saying, they're talking about they're talking about every Jew, even the Dati Lumi. They're talking about everybody. So why are they saying that? Because they really don't know what they're talking about. Okay, so let's continue. I want to just go through just a quick list of the types of things that they did so you can understand. First of all, they lied. And basically about many things the Rambam taught. So for example, on the Mishnah in Nida 5:4, they claimed that the Rambam allows sex with minors, which is not the case. As we find out from Dr. Michael Brown, he points out that that's not the case. These have to do with other things, not like that. In the Rambam, in the Laws of Women 21:10, he says a husband's allowed to be the wife. That's not what it says there. A Jewish Beis Din had the power at one time, they don't have any more, but Jewish Beis Din had power at one time to beat either a husband or wife who is not fulfilling their obligations. This has nothing to do with women. It has to do with the fact that if you're obligated in marriage to do certain things and you don't fulfill your obligations, and it doesn't have to do with anything like that. Okay? In Rambam, in the Laws of Women 13:11, it says women are not allowed to leave the house. They claim that women are not allowed to have. Absolute lie. In fact, it says it's specifically there that women are not prison home. They can go to different places like that. The rabbis are against both men and women just wandering the streets and just doing things, like that, because that leads to all kinds of different things. But they're not allowed. There's nothing like that. It talks about women going to the husbands, wives, buying, selling, whatever's necessary to do is obviously allowed. They're not prisons at home. It just talks about the proper modesty that women and also men have to do. Totally distorting text. Next is misrepresenting text. They bring a Medrash Rabbah, where Manoach says that women are not to be believed and they're untrustworthy. But what they forget is that that's what Manoach is saying. It's not what the rabbis are saying. The rabbis are repeating the story of what happened to Manoach. And it's not because Manoach was such a great person. The purpose of the story is that Manoach was absolutely wrong because his wife was saying what was truthful. And everything she said was true. And he should have believed her and she didn't. So you're like the opposite. In fact, the rabbis, of course we believe our wives. We believe all the wives all the time. There's no such thing. It's absolutely false. Then, of course, they bring texts which don't exist. Many texts they bring are very difficult to find. They don't bring proper location. Many texts don't exist. So he claims that, for example, in Tractate Kedushin and Rabbi Bechaya on the Talmud, which he doesn't have, says that Satan was created at the same time as Eve. Well, that we know is false, because the Medrash itself, and Rashi brings it in Genesis 1:5, says specifically that the angels, which Satan is an angel, if you look in the book of Job in the beginning, you find that Satan is one of the angels, that angels were created on the second day. They weren't created when Eve was created from man on the sixth day. Now, I have no idea what the source is for this, what they're talking about. Certainly Kedushin on the page that he points to, it doesn't say anything about that. So I really don't even know what they might be even talking to. There may be some text that they're misunderstanding. But again, these are bogus texts. And we see some of these a few times. Then, of course, he misunderstands and represents what people are teaching. So, for example, there was a rabbi who was teaching about rape, soldiers allowed to rape. What he doesn't understand is the question being discussed is what's discussed in Deuteronomy 21:10-14, which says that Hashem commands that in a certain war about the Canaanite nations, that if a man sees a woman, he's allowed to take her. He doesn't rape her, he takes her into a house, and if he still decides, he can marry her. That's what it says there. So the question, this person will bring up a question, does that involve, is that relate to the wars that Israel is having. That's what the questions. That's what he's talking about. That's the questions. That's what it is. Okay. Now, another instance was this Yasser Mizrahi, who of course is not reliable, but he says that he's saying that rape is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. So mitzvah means something you're commanded to do. Not just allowed. You're commanded to do. It's a good thing to do. So what he says is, it's totally absurd, because if you look at it, what he's talking about there is another question whatsoever. A man has a requirement to have children. He has to have a certain amount of children to be required to fulfill his mitzvah of having children. The question being asked is, if a man rapes a woman, and that's punishable, if a man rapes a woman and she has a child, is that child goes towards what he's required to have? There's nothing to do with rape being allowed. It's talking about something that had happened. He'd raped somebody. The woman had a child. So what's the question about that? The Talmud is filled with questions about theoretical things. Okay? Now, in many cases, the hypocritical attacks that they have about the rabbis, and not just one, they make a couple of these. They make a claim that the rabbis say things were against science. Well, the New Testament doesn't say things against science. Matthew 2:9, where it talks about a star moves from one place to another to be in Bethlehem. We know that's not scientific. We're not even talking about miracles, so it's not scientific. Or, for example, attacking rabbis because we say you're going to be punished in the next world for your sins. What about Revelation 21:8, where it talks about people going to the lake of fire for many similar things? Absolutely hypocritical. Then they make unsupported accusations. The rabbis said, the rabbis say you can humiliate or you can beat and murder women. But we see that's not the case. In the Rambam, Hilchos Eishes, that in fact that's not the case. Now, to conclude about this, what we see here is very simple. The types of attacks, the way they attack, the hypocrisy, is very, very similar to neo-Nazis. Very, very similar to neo-Nazis. Okay? Now, there's a very strong relationship between the church, they call the body Messiah, and what we see there is that they're good to us when it comes to conversion, when they want to do things, but afterwards it's not, and it's exactly what's happening with these people. Okay? Barr and his company, all his people, are just a continuation of the anti-Semitic way that Christians have dealt with Jews until now. In exactly the same ways as you see with the Nazis and the anti-Semites. And of course, the result is going to be the same as it was with Martin Luther. Now, our rabbis are not evil, like Eitan Bar is trying to say. What it is, the truth of the matter is the Christian anti-Semites and the Nazis, the people who think like that, those are the people who are really the wicked people. And they're very dangerous for Israel, because what it does, it's going to lead to discord and problems there. Because the society, of course, is based on certain degrees of cooperation. And by doing this kind of stuff, it would cause an extreme amount of problems. Okay, so I would like to just end this with a little statement from Dr. Brown in his next book, which I think is something we should take back to us and something that they should recognize. This is the way a Christian who doesn't believe with us and doesn't believe in the rabbis actually thinks. Let me also say this. There are many edifying teachers in the Talmud and rabbinic traditions, many wise sayings, many beautiful traditions. There are moving prayers and heartfelt confessions, and for many religious Jews, there is great delight in studying and applying God's law. To them, nothing could be more sacred, even in its tiniest details. One rabbi who died in 2015 began his day by reciting the entire book of Psalms, taking several hours to do it, so as to focus on the words he was saying. And he would not begin reciting the traditional morning prayers until 3 p.m., since it took him long to prepare his heart to pray those prayers, which he finished by 6 p.m., at which time he would have something to drink for the first time in the day. He would then accept visitors throughout the evening, stopping only to daven marv, meaning pray the early evening prayer, and to finally eat his first meal of the day at midnight. After that, he continued taking visitors throughout the night, and as the morning broke, he would have some fruit before saying Berachas HaShachar, the blessings in the morning. and Krias while they're reciting the Shema. Following it by a short 6 a.m. nap, then he would again be up by 7:30 a.m. to resume his spiritual activities. Most of his family was killed in the Holocaust, including his own father, yet his faith and devotion remained steady. And there are many other Jews like him, certainly not as extreme in their personal religious habits, but just as committed to seeking to please God and obey his Torah. For them, the Talmud is a deeply spiritual set of books, a treasure of divine truth and a guide for life. They would be mortified to know that anyone would think the Talmud was filled with such evil. I don't think I need to say any more than that. Okay, have a good day, and I hope this has been very helpful to you in seeing what the truth is.
Right on, absolutely. Okay, so our next show will be next week, of course, as usual. Same time, same place, Hashem willing.
Same time, same place, yeah.
Same time, same place. And Rabbi, thank you again for your time.
Okay.
And I know it was a big task to bite off, and it's good to get this out there. So if you guys watch these shows, share these with your friends, because especially ones who are really very anti-Semitic. I mean, most of these claims I've been hearing for years was from people who claim to know their stuff about the oral law and things like that, and they just clearly have no clue other than just what they've learned off Christian websites. So that's pretty much it. All right, Rabbi. Well, we will talk to you again soon. Y'all have a great week, Shavua Tov, and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד.